Hello, in this video I'm going to explain the difference between primitive and reference data types as well as mutability and immutability in JavaScript. I'm going to first explain it using this diagram, and we're going to jump into CodePen where I'm going to show you a couple of examples to make sure that you have a strong grasp of these concepts. So what is the difference between primitive and reference data types? What do we mean when we say that a data type is primitive or a data type is a reference data type? Well, when we say that a data type is primitive, we're implicitly implying that it is immutable. And what immutability means that it lacks the ability to change. An example of primitive data types are strings, numbers, and booleans. Now, when we say that a data type is a reference data type, we say that it's mutable. That means it has the ability to change. An example of these are lists and objects. So, what do we mean when we say that a data type does not have the ability to change? Well, I'm going to try to show you these using a couple of examples, but here, just imagine we have a boolean, and that boolean is true. That boolean, true, can never be changed to false. True, the boolean literal, true, literal meaning literally a boolean, the boolean literal, true, can never be false. While if we initialize an object with a key value pair where the score is set to 2, it can be changed to a key value pair where the score is set to 3. The score is set to 3. That same object. Well, some people get confused because they assign a number to a variable, let's say x, and that number might initially be the number of 2. So let's say variable x is set to 2. Let me show that. Variable x is set to 2. And by the end of the day, this same variable has a value of 1,000. And this might seem like, well, we have just mutated the number, but we did not mutate the number literal. We didn't mutate the number 2. All we did was change the value of x. And a very hard thing for I feel like some people might be confused because they do not separate the primitive data type from the variable they're assigning it to. Their primitive data type is different from the variable you're assigning it to. You can't change that variable. You cannot change the primitive data type. 2 will always be 2. Now let me go into CodePen. If you didn't get what I'm trying to explain here, it's all fine. Let me go into CodePen and show you this using code. Here I have JavaScript editor open, and I'm going to go into the console, and I'm going to clear the console, and I'm going to declare a variable foo. I'm going to set it to an object with a key value pair where score is set to 2. I'm going to create another variable, bar, and I'm going to set it to the exact same object. Now, to the untrained eye, foo and bar are the same, but in reality, in JavaScript, they are not. So if we were to check for equality, we're going to see that, hey, foo is not equal to bar. So why is that? Well, it is because object is a reference variable. So what does that mean? Well, when we initialize an object, when we create an object, it is stored in some place in memory. So let's say it's stored in the address 1122. And when we create another object, we are going to create a new place in memory for it. Let's say 1234. Now, where this object and where it's stored in memory is different than this object because it's stored in a different place in memory. This is done because, well, this is a mutable data type. We can change this data type. In the future, when we change this data type, it's not going to change all the objects that are similar or are same, have the same key value pair. All it is going to do is going to go into this place in memory, going to go which references this object and change this object. Now, if I were to say bar is set to foo, the value of bar is foo, and I were to check for equality, now we get true. So what's happening now? So bar now is just another name for foo. So if we were to change the score, for example, I were to bar score and I want to say, hey, I want the score to be 3. And I am going to console log foo. We're going to see that the value of foo has now changed. So this is an important concept to grasp, that foo and bar are both referencing the same object, which is stored in a place in memory. So if we were to change bar, if we were to mutate bar, the number set to something else, it will then foo will try to retrieve, when we call foo, it will try to retrieve that value, and similarly when we call bar, it's going to try to retrieve that value as well. Now, this does not, the primitive data types have a different behavior. So let's say if foo is set to 2 and bar is equal to foo, and let's say bar will be the number literal 3. When we console log foo, we see that it still remains the number literal 2. So why is this? Well, when we passed down, when we said bar is equal to foo, all we did, it's similar as saying bar is equal to 2. And then we replaced bar with a new value, 3, and that did not reference, that's not referencing a place in memory where 2 is stored. And we overwrote this variable with a new value. Now let's check if these two are equal to one another. When we did that with objects, we got false. But with primitive data types, 2 will always be 2. We're not creating this new place in memory. 2 is always 2. 2 will be equal to 2. Again, it is very important. We can change the value of bar. We can say, hey, bar is set to 3, and then they're not equal to one another. But it's very important to distinguish what comes after the equal to mark to what comes before the equal to mark. Earlier, we mutated, we changed the object, which was after the equal to mark. But here, how can we change 2? We can overwrite it. We can overwrite bar with a new number literal, but we really can't change 2. But here, we can change what's after the equal to mark. Well, after the equal to sign. Did I say mark? Forget that. Another example, which we'll do, is, let's say we have a variable foo, which is an object with a key value bear, which has a score, a value of 2, and I am going to declare this function which takes in this object and returns a mutated version of this object. So plus equal to 1. We're going to increment the score by 1. And let me console log the value of the input. And let me run this function. Foo. And console log foo. Here we see that we have changed, we have mutated this object literal. How did we do this? Well, it might look like it's self-evident. We took the input and we changed the score and we incremented by 1 and therefore we changed the score here, but this is not how it works for primitive data types. This is a reference data type. But let's try to do this, implement the same thing and copy and paste it, but in this case let me change this to bar, and let's say this is a primitive data type, and let's change bar to number literal 2, and we're incrementing it by 1. Here, when we did the exact same thing but to a primitive data type, we see that when we called on bar, like we called on foo and logged it, we see that it did not change. The value of bar did not change, but the value of foo changed. So what happened here? Here, input, when we console logged input, we returned an object. So input was referencing a place in memory, and so when we said input.score, we returned the score and we modified it, and we modified the object here in memory to be 3. And when we logged foo, it returned this particular object. That is not the case with this primitive data type. Here, when we console logged it, we received this number literal. And this is literally the number 2. And we returned 2 incremented by 1. So which returned 3. So if we were to log this function, we're going to see the number 3. So it did work, but there was no reference to bar here. We can overwrite the value of bar. We can say here, we can say bar plus equal to 1, which is equivalent to saying bar is equal to bar plus 1. Here we overwrote the value of bar, and therefore we have therefore when we logged it, we got the number 3. The big takeaway from this is that reference data types are mutable, and you can think of them as referring to a place in memory when you initialize an object or a list, while primitive data types are immutable. They cannot be changed. And another more important concept to grasp is that just because we are changing the variable does not mean we're changing what comes after the variable, what comes after the equal to sign. So I hope after watching this video you understood the difference, you understand the difference between primitive and reference data types and mutability and immutability in JavaScript. I hope you have a good day, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.